Okay, so this panel is called, as Alex said, Smart Curb Management and Collaboration as a Key to Civic Innovation. And before I introduce everybody, I've been asked to give a couple of words about what those things mean. So curb management, all about using digital tools to manage public space, right? Trying to balance the fact that too many people in groups want to load and unload, walk, bike, park, dine, and otherwise use our limited curb space. We're trying to use that space in more efficient and equitable ways. SMART grants, you'll notice SMART here is capitalized. That actually stands for Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation, which is the federal program that's currently funding 93 projects and counting to deploy all different kinds of smart city and smart community technologies across our country. I am the policy advisor to the SMART grants team at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and our three panelists who are going to be joining us are all representing either individual SMART grant projects or a collaborative that works across those projects to try to realize some of these curb management goals that we have. So today I would first like to invite Andrew Glass Hastings, who's the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation, then Jarvis Murray, who is the commercial rideshare and mobility administrator here at Los Angeles DOT, and then Jacob Sherman, who is the mobility innovations manager at the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Come on up, gentlemen. So everybody's going to get a chance to introduce yourselves a little bit more, tell us a little bit about your organizations, and for Jarvis and Jacob in particular, a little bit about your projects, just so that everybody knows what we're talking about. You want to start, Andrew?
All right, good afternoon. Andrew Glass Hastings. I'm the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation. Thanks for joining us here. I live in Seattle, so it is a special treat to have the sun shining this amount, so it's always difficult to be inside every moment that you're not soaking up the sun. But if you didn't have a chance to participate or join us for the OMF Summit on Tuesday, the OMF is a nonprofit organization that works with cities and technology companies and mobility operators to co-create open source data standards that are designed to help cities navigate the transformation of digital mobility. So right before us, whether we see it's Waymo or shared electric scooters or eventually perhaps aerial taxis, the way we move around cities is changing and becoming much more digital. And oftentimes cities don't have the capacity or knowledge or ability to keep pace with some of that change. So the OMF hosts a trusted forum for the collaboration between the public and private sector to create the tools that enable cities to do this type of management of the new urban mobility forms. All right, I'll pause there and talk more about some specifics later. Thanks, Madeline.
Yeah, thanks. Jarvis.
All right, thank you all, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for allowing me to be in this prestigious group. I love everybody on this panel. Jacob is one of my few taxi friends in the world, and then Andrew is a fellow UC Davis graduate because it's the best university in California besides Santa Clara, which is and then Madeline, who's incredibly smart and apparently an expert snowmobiler. So what we do in our world. I'm up here primarily because we have several things going on. I manage a project that deals a lot with MDS. And so I think you guys have heard a lot about MDS, and if you were at the OMF Summit, you heard a lot about that part. MDS often functions for us in a regulatory way, in an operational kind of way, where we push out policies and we dictate how things should work on the street. But now we're beginning to look at the curb space. And so for those of you who've been walking around LA, you've likely seen our delivery robots, and some of you have been taking a Waymo, or you're taking a TNC or a taxi, or maybe you rode a scooter, or you did bike share. Our curbs are getting incredibly crowded. And now we're in a space where, how do we use this asset that everyone now wants to use? I mean, they've always wanted to use it, but traditionally we've always put it for vehicles, for cars, and for car movement, and related to the stores. And so now we're trying to figure out, how do we do this for cars, for commercial loading, for our scooters, for our bikes, and even for our little delivery robots with the eyes rolling around that you see downtown. And a lot of that now, a lot of the projects we're working on now, at least in LA, first we have to do an inventory of our asset. So we're trying to get a sense of what is our curb space. But using CDS, which is the curb data specification in the future, we're not only going to know what our assets are, what's in and around those assets, but how they are being used. And so at that point, we'll start figuring out, okay, this has been mostly for commercial loading. This has been mostly for personal use. This has been mostly for whatever. And whatever the dwell time was, we're going to begin to figure out those things as we begin using CDS. So I do a lot with MDS, and eventually my work is going to begin overlapping with CDS. And that's really, where we are. And so for the city of LA, we're very data focused, we're very data centric. All of our scooters are on MDS. The delivery robots are on MDS. Our taxi fleet is on MDS. We're talking with TNCs and AVs about MDS usage. And then eventually, once we get a full inventory of our incredible asset, our curbs, then we'll start pushing out data and policies for, here's how we want this curb to be used dynamically, whether it's through signage, whether it's through the specification itself. These are the things we're getting to work on, and part of that is funded through some of the grants we received from the Department of Transportation. And I'm going to pull in a plug because bureaucracy takes time, Madeline, and we may need an extension. But these are things that we are working on, and so I'm going to pass it to one of my favorite taxi people in Portland, and NEMT I recently learned, so we have a lot to talk about on the NEMT side as well.
We should do that sometime, Jarvis. Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here. Jacob Sherman with the City of Portland, Oregon. I manage our mobility innovations team. Our team is working kind of at the intersection of transportation and emerging technology. And so what that means is working on topics like mobility data, working on things like scooters, bike share, car share, and more recently we've been working on zero emission delivery and freight and how we can decarbonize goods movement. We are the recipient of one of the Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation grants, where we have been using the resources to pilot the nation's first zero-emission delivery zone in a small part of our downtown core. What this means kind of functionally is we have reprioritized existing truck loading zones to be for zero-emission vehicles only. We've gone through the process like other cities to literally code the curb. At these truck loading zones, we've also installed advanced parking sensors that are capturing data in real time about how those loading zones are used. And we're using all of those pieces together to really understand, is the curb an effective strategy for driving climate action at the local level? And we think that it is. And we could talk more about that as we move forward, but that's just kind of a brief overview of some of the work we're doing in Portland.
Madeline, can I take a moment and just quickly, I don't want to assume everyone in the audience is an OMF expert, so just really quickly, a little ground setting. MDS, Jarvis was mentioning, the mobility data specification is a tool used Los Angeles and Portland, cities across North America, Europe, and around the world to manage the two-way exchange of information. So it's not just about agencies understanding how these shared mobility devices are being used on the streets of the cities, how many devices they are, where they're located, what their status is, what their trip patterns are, which is really important for a planning and management approach for cities. But it also allows cities to be able to share digital policy back to those operators. So think of it as a common digital language that everyone in the world is using. And so that when if Lime bikes are here in Los Angeles or in cities in Europe or across North America, they are using that same common digital language to share information with that municipality. And in the digital policy realm, what that means is that cities can communicate things like speed limits or designated parking areas for the devices or geo-fenced no-ride areas, either around special events on a temporary basis or perhaps more permanently around things like parks, assets that cities would like to prevent the riding of these devices through. And MDS also applies from micromobility all the way through car sharing that was mentioned, to taxis, Uber, robo-taxis, and even sidewalk delivery robots. So it's capturing a lot of the shared mobility devices that we see in cities today. And as we further develop this open source data standard will capture more mobility services that people are using going forward. All right, thanks, Madeline. Thanks for that discretion there.
No problem. It's always really helpful when everybody knows all the acronyms that we're going to use, including the longest one, which Jacob remembered very well. So you've heard a little bit about each of these projects and a little bit about what MDS does at a sort of technical level, what it can be used for. But I think one of the really important places to start all of these conversations is around the sort of deeper underlying why your cities, starting with Jarvis and with Jacob, chose to invest in these particular problems. Jarvis, you mentioned as a regulatory tool. Jacob, you mentioned for climate action. But I can't imagine that you went to either your superiors or to your city council or to your residents and you said, we're going to implement an open source bi-directional data standard for communication with on-street assets. Like, that probably didn't mean anything to anybody. So tell us a little bit about what was the underlying motivation for taking on these projects amid the many priorities that you could have been investing in. Whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I can start. So I did try the bi-directional conversation, and you're right, it didn't fly. But what we really were looking at is volume. So initially for us, it's volume. Like I mentioned earlier, we have so much volume on our curb. Well, we have a lot of volume in the other services as well. And so, and I mentioned this before at another panel. I remember the days of when you had to stand on the curb and stand with a clicker and watch vehicles go by. And that's how you were trying to track things. And then you try to put together whatever data set you could to make it make sense. And you eventually ended up with something that was helpful, but I always called it anecdata. So it's you have an idea, but you don't truly know what's going on. And so for us, that was the investment. If I'm going to have 15,000 vehicles or 20,000 vehicles or whatever it's going to be, I can't have people out there going click, 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 click. We have to have something that communicates this automatically. And then what if we do want to push out a policy? The old way of pushing out a policy was erecting a sign and putting something up there that says, don't do this. Or, if you had a street parade, someone was going out there tying signs to poles, temporary zone, temporary movement, don't go here, don't go there. And now we're able to now push out a policy that says, hey, vehicles, hey, scooter, hey, robot, don't enter this zone for this reason. And I know Seattle was in the audience, and they talked a little bit about what they're going to begin doing with 911. They're beginning to do MDS with 911, where they're going to push out if it's a 4-alarm fire and this radius needs to be blocked off, they can push that out in MDS. So there's no more, again, the old days, call every company. This is how, in 50s movies, 1950s, call everybody, put out an all points bulletin, make sure that happens. And we don't have to do that anymore. Our all points bulletin is me telling Vladimir and Sergio and Jose, hey, the police need this. Got it. And they get together, they draw the maps, they push it out, and it's done in like a matter of, minutes, because by the time I'm done telling them, they're like, sent it already? And so that's really a lot of why we do this. And even as we look at the curbs, that's exactly what we're going to do on that standpoint as well. So as we're beginning all this work on the curbs and all this usage, we're going to begin wanting to utilize it in a more dynamic fashion. And instead of, again, erecting signs about what you can and can't do, potentially being able to say, commercial loading for this long, and you can use this, no private loading, or private loading only in this area, or AV only, taxi only, TNC only. I mean, there will still be some hardscape to this. I just had a call yesterday about a taxi zone at a hotel that's being renovated, and they're going to reopen soon. So there'll always be some hardscape, but this is basically being able to also dynamically manage what you have on the street.
And I think we're very interested in doing some of the exact same dynamic management kind of features in terms of working with scooter companies or car share companies or bike share companies. And I think the opportunity there is to do our work as government officials more efficiently, because we don't have enough staff to go out in the field and see if pick on Lime because I see Carla here, to see if they have 1,500 scooters on the streets of Portland. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources, but with the data, we're able to kind of efficiently figure that out and manage that. And allow these services to kind of operate and thrive. And so I think that's some of the kind of the genesis for why Portland and other cities are embarking in this work. I think as we're thinking about our SMART grant specifically, we've been wondering how we can kind of code the curb, use advanced parking sensors, and start to put together the pieces of the puzzle to figure out how can we reprioritize curb access for some of the things we're trying to support as a city. Many cities around the U.S., we support bicycling, so we put in bike racks. We support EV, electric vehicles, because of our decarbonization priorities, so we've started to put in curbside chargers. We want to decarbonize the goods movement industry, so we are starting to allocate space for zero-emission delivery vehicles. And this grant has been an opportunity to test that out, to try it, to work on the data, the technical data exchanges with companies, to figure out how the sensors can pull data down and integrate into third-party data visualization platforms, and how we can tap into that, and how we can make changes in real time and push that out to e-cargo bike delivery operators, so that, again, we can use the technology to serve our larger climate policy, our safety policies, and any of the other policies, economic development policies that we have. I think for us, this technology is about serving that larger purpose. It's not about tech for tech's sake.
Okay, here's your data specification infomercial, phase 2. All right, so if MDS, the mobility data specification, what does CDS stand for? Anyone? Curb data specification. There we go. Excellent. All right, so we're going to get into talking a little bit more about this. And Jarvis and Jacob have already mentioned what they're coding the curb, and they're doing that with the curb data specification as the foundation. And just like MDS facilitates the exchange of information across different geographies, across different modes of shared mobility, CDS enables cities to digitize their curb rules and regulations. And we've all had the experience of trying to park on a city street where you get out of the car or the truck and you're looking at the waterfall of signage.
The totem pole.
Oh, the totem pole. Okay, that's very Northwest
pole.
appropriate. All right, I like it. The totem pole of signage, trying to interpret whether or not at that moment in time, on that day, in that spot, you can legally park there or load or do the activity that you're trying to do. And so the idea behind CDS, which co-created with cities and the software companies that are helping cities digitize their physical space, is convert that physical asset into a digital version, create a digital inventory of the curbs in, again, a language that is the same here in Los Angeles or Seattle or Portland or cities ultimately around the world, so that one, that information can be then made publicly available in a machine-readable format so that all the fleet users, all of whether it's Uber or Amazon or others who have a digital connection can understand what those curb rules and regulations are, or all of us that may be using a mobile app to try to pay for parking can also know what those curb rules and regulations are. And then the cities can understand how the curb is being used. Who, what, where, why at the curb level, and then take that information and make better informed policy decisions about the future allocation of the curb. The curb, if you think about it, not to get wonky, but it's some of the most valuable real estate in cities today, and yet is also some of the most kind of undermanaged. It's not mismanaged, it's just undermanaged. Partly because it hasn't been able to keep up with the advancements of technology and what we expect from kind of today's management of assets and public space. So CDS fundamentally enables cities to kind of catch up with the demands on that curb or that public space and be able to more dynamically manage it in a digital format.
I think they're recording this, so you can just clip those two bulletins out and put them on the website as like MDS 101, CDS 101. You need to explain to anyone what it is. Here's the Andrew moment. But that's really helpful to understand. And actually, I wanted to ask you because the OMF has the benefit of having perspective across all the different cities that are working with these specifications, and where we may have depth in some cases, you guys have breadth. And so I wanted to ask you about some of the other emerging use cases for MDS and CDS that you've been seeing across all of your members. We heard about a few of them from Jacob and thinking about freight and delivery and things like that, but I'm sure there are a lot of other ones. So what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, we had the opportunity, as a membership organization representing cities across North America and cities in Europe and elsewhere, to be a convener. And there's collaboration in the title of this session, and a lot of what we do is about fostering collaboration and we like to say co-creation between the public and private sectors. But with the introduction, the development of CDS, and then the introduction in its first version, not that long ago, there's always that learning curve, that first mover challenge. Who is going to be able to take this new tool to digitize curb rules and regulations and actually use it in a way that enables cities to advance their policy outcomes, whether that's climate policy, safety-related changes, equity. And so, fortunately, the USDOT created the SMART Grant program. And in their first round, going way back now, a couple years ago, in that first round of SMART, there was an option, there was a box you could click as an applicant to be a part of a collaborative. Now, this seemed like a simple little box and a simple check, but actually was a transformative opportunity, not just for the OMF, but for the cities that were able to convene for this project, and a new approach for USDOT in granting funds to cities directly. And so it allowed us to pull together 10 of our members, and each one of those 10 applied separately, LA, Portland being 2 of the 10. They applied for the SMART grant separately, but in checking that box, they acknowledged that they intended to work together as a group. Not necessarily on that one project they're applying for, but as a peer network. The ability to share knowledge and learnings and be able to work with a group of first movers so that no one of these cities was doing this new thing on their own. New things can be hard. You're breaking new ground. And this group, this Smart Curb Collaborative, as we've called it, has had the benefit of being able, whether it's a shoulder to lean on, maybe cry on sometimes, or just to compare notes. How did this work for you? Even sometimes on the vendor side, how is it working with that particular vendor? What are you hearing? It has been extremely valuable in fostering collaboration across the group, and yet allowing each city to advance their own project. So, Jacob talked about the zero emission delivery zone that they're advancing, or Jarvis just about the opportunity to code the curb and to bring new management approaches. We've got Seattle is doing a really interesting permit-based loading zone project. There are different kind of whys for each of these projects, but the CDS is a consistent theme throughout each of them, which is in many ways enabling them to experiment in their own way, but in a very collaborative environment.
I'll just say that collaborative approach and the impetus to put that box on the application was in part born from experience that USDOT has, particularly in the Federal Highway Administration, doing something called pooled fund studies, where states actually, and it's harder for them because they have to put their own money in, but states will contribute funds to a pooled fund, and then they can share whatever technology they're trialing or whatever new approach to inductive loops or new pavement graders or new ways of looking at de-icing or whatever it is that they share common problems with, and then the learnings and the resources from that are shared back out, and they get to rotate equipment and that sort of thing. So we were not the ones who invented that, but we do find that having more stakeholders, whether they be cities or states or whomever, working together to learn things certainly accelerates their learning process. One of the things that you mentioned is the power of everybody working together on the same technological foundation, but applying it to so many different locations, whether they're different use cases or different geographical locations. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of a sort of standard like that. We invested in so many projects in the Curb Collaborative. There are now 10 of them over the 2 years, because we see that standardization, particularly open standards that are community-based and driven by the user groups and bring together, in this case, private sector, public sector, all the different data producers and consumers, can have outsized ability to transform a sector or transform a problem. We saw this, with the general transit feed specification in transit. We hope to see it also on the curb and mobility side. So I wondered if anyone wants to talk a little bit about, the power of working with the open standard, what's been helpful about it, also what's been challenging about it. Are you sort of adapting them for your local context? Are you using them sort of closely adhered to the spec? How are those changing as you actually get into implementing your projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the power of co-developing a shared standard means that you get all those benefits of standardization. Again, as Andrew mentioned, operators can scale between cities. So it's not, come to Portland and give us this data set as a CSV file, and go to LA and give them a different data set, and go to Philly and give them a different data. There's the opportunity to figure it out one time and then be able to deliver it for everyone. And I think that is kind of the power of cities getting together to shape the market in that way. I think as we've worked through this, both on mobility data specification and now the curb data specification, I think with CDS in particular, we're at that like rubber meets the road kind of moment. I mean, just last week, one of the e-cargo bike delivery companies that we're working with in Portland, actually started to hit the Curbs API and pull that into their systems for some of the first time, which is super exciting from a technology innovation perspective. But we're still, I think, just in the early days of doing this. And as we work through implementation, I think we're going to kind of figure out, is the spec too complicated? Are we asking for things that may or may not be helpful in the long run? How do we narrow things down? How do we build that consensus across different segments of the transportation kind of industry? So I think we're getting there. I know you in LA, because we've talked about it, have spent time working with the taxi industry to bring them on board and modernize those systems. And I think that is another one of those challenges in terms of, we might have really advanced companies, some of which we've mentioned here, Waymo or Amazon. We've also spent a lot of time talking to the mom and pop furniture delivery or furniture movers in our city, or the produce delivery folks, and the electricians that are coming down to service our buildings. And they're trying to figure out, not only we're asking them to think about a zero emission future, they're also well, what is this data? What is that? And so it's just, I think the logistics space is really complicated. It's not uniform. And I think that is one of the challenges we're going to face as we move forward. But I think we're excited to be doing that with other cities and with kind of a peer network where we can constantly learn from one another and sometimes cry with one another too.
So Jacob's exactly right about that. And I know that within my own department, we regulate 7 or 8 separate modes, some that are super sophisticated and some that are not sophisticated at all. And, and Jacob and I have to have a conversation about NEMT, which is non-emergency medical transportation. And we have 140 mom and pop companies. It was just cousins doing dialysis trips. And those are the kinds of things that we are trying to eventually put together. So in LA, the beauty of the standardization is that we're trying to get everything kind of in one system. So that's what's good for us. But on the operator side, as we talk to our companies that are a little bit bigger, like on the taxi space, we have an e-hail provider named Curb. They're much bigger in New York and Chicago than they are in LA. And, even though we're putting them on our taxi data specification, just them knowing that this is a specification that's going to exist in those cities as well, they know those cities are already using it in some capacity or other, was easy for them to say, okay, we'll go ahead and link into this one because we know that if we go to New York or Chicago or where Chicago asks for this data, we'll be able to say, we're ready, We're already doing it in LA. We just turn it on for you. We'll turn on the exact same feed. And so that's been, the beauty for them on this aspect. And when we talk to the companies, there's a little bit of that to it. You were mentioning like you could be the first people to do it, and it often feels that way. It feels like you're the person who jumps off the cliff, and when you land, you shout up how far down it was. But that is a little bit of what we have to do. And as we begin standardizing these pieces, we're going to get to a space where it's going to be easy for people to plug in. And even as I talk to, the less sophisticated owners and businesses, if I know that there's a third party that knows how to do this, that can work with you, that will be the key to help getting you on board, even though your systems aren't currently there. Like for instance, the person who works a lot on our smart grants, Zachary Campos, who's I think here in the audience, and really, really smart. One of the things he said about this work is the ability to collaborate with companies and with businesses and with other agencies and with the OMF. And I find that that's the beauty of our work, because a lot of what we like to do is get together with the private industry and just figure out, how does this work for you? And what works best for you? Which is why when they join the OMF, they can talk through those pieces as well. Like, this data-wise works, this doesn't work, and knowing they can call. Like my taxi companies, they mention how expensive it is to host data. And so we had a conversation about, how fast do I need real-time data? Do I need it every 5 seconds? Do I need it every 30 seconds? Because the Verizon bill for them is here at 5 seconds, and it's here, at 30 seconds, and it's here at a minute. And we were able to talk through those pieces. But the beauty is, MDS, you set your SLA. It's the same thing coming in. You just have to decide which one works for you. And so it was easy for them to work out those pieces. So that's a lot of what I think is the beauty of the collaboration and the beauty of the standardization and the work that we do.
Has anyone tried to learn a new dance move, new dance step, a new dance all just overall? Yeah, yes. Has anybody tripped and fallen in the process of learning that new dance move or that new dance?
It's like we're learning something about Andrew here.
But
now we know who the TikTok users are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But those, learning new dance moves, I don't know, at least for me, it's hard. Inevitably, like my feet just don't work in that particular way, and I end up on the floor. I have to hand it to the 10 cities that are part of the collaborative, and in particular USDOT, for taking a risk, for being like I mentioned, the first to try something new. And inevitably there was going to be a little bit of stumbling. Nobody has fallen flat on their face. I don't think there have been any emergency room visits, but it hasn't always been the easiest. And yet they're doing the hard work to enable every other city to follow after them and have an easier job of doing what will ultimately become standard practice, which is managing a digital curb inventory. So it's that early kind of investment in the energy and the time and the commitment that quite literally through the collaborative is creating the playbook. It's creating kind of the instruction manual for how cities can follow suit. And we're already seeing new and exciting opportunities to apply this learning, apply the standard for some interesting use cases. Yesterday, there was a great conversation that touched on the World Cup planning and the planning that will need to be done by host cities, including Los Angeles, Seattle, and others, in the lead up between now and hosting the World Cup in 2026. Like CDS is a really exciting opportunity to actually take what this collaborative has learned and apply it towards managing the public space in the lead up to this major sporting event, and thinking about dynamic pricing or dynamic access to the curb as a management principle, but also potentially because it's important for local governments today, as a revenue source, as a way to actually help sustainably fund some of this investment in new digital tools. So the foundation of the spec and the hard work that's being done by some of the cities as they stumble through this is going to make it much easier for a lot of the other cities that are coming after them and their technology partners to be able to realize the potential through things like managing major events around the World Cup or otherher.
Yeah, well, thank you, Andrew. You just keyed up a bunch of the topics that we're going to focus on for the second half of this conversation. I think, the there's both collaboration, which I want to talk about in a moment, also sustainability. And also, how do you go from learning your dance move to teaching your dance move to others? Also, after this, everyone find Andrew and ask him to show you his moves. So we've been talking about collaboration with vendors, with companies who would be consuming and producing data. I want to talk a little bit about internal collaboration as well. You know, we sort of jokingly said you don't go to your city council and say we're going to do this fancy new data thing, but as you've been implementing these projects and as you've been speaking with members of the collaborative, who are the stakeholders, either within your organization or within your city, that are really critical to have? And what are the messages that are actually landing with them to get them on board? Because, you know, projects like these are very, very interdisciplinary. I had a smart grantee in a different space say to me once, like, this is the project has the most people from the most departments of any project or agency has ever done in its history. And so, you know, that is a job in and of itself.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think the internal collaboration has been a fun experience, and maybe there was a little hesitancy in that. As I was saying it, I was like, well, it actually reminds me of managing when we launched scooters in our city, and I think that is an interesting kind of thing, because I think at that moment there was a lot of innovation and new process and internal change management that was applied, and I think people learned skills and developed our own kind of public sector innovation muscle that we're like doing our reps on right now again. And so I think, you know, within the Portland Bureau of Transportation, I mean, we've worked with everyone from like parking enforcement to the electricians installing sensors to parking planning folks to policy folks. We've worked with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, decarbonization policy. I mean, there's just like the whole gamut of people that we've had to engage in a variety of different ways. I think one of the things that's been really helpful for us as kind of a policy forward organization is to have a common jumping off point of our climate action plan, of our climate emergency work plan, of our 2040 freight plan, and to like have these processes that we've been through as an organization where we say these things matter, and now all of a sudden we're here taking things out of that plan and saying we're doing them. And so I think that has been very helpful. I think also we have, with this project as well as kind of more broadly, spent a lot of time within our teams talking about change management. And this is something we've actually spent a lot of time as a collaborative of cities talking about change management together, because I think we are both trying to change the world around us, and there's change management processes to be aware of and be considerate of. But we also need to do that kind of internally at the exact same time. You know, one of the kind of surprising conversations as we were getting ready to launch our pilot zero emission delivery zone, you know, we did all sorts of robust stakeholder involvement, bunch of focus groups, knocking on doors, all sorts of internal meetings, and we were like 6 days away from launching this when we got a fiery email from our facilities director CCing the deputy city administrator, the mayor's staff, saying, you've never talked to us about this project. What's going on? How everything's, the sky is falling. And I was on vacation. The next morning we got on, still on vacation, got on a call with them, with the mayor's office. We talked through it. And I think as we got to talk through it, they got to understand it. We very politely reminded her that we did actually engage her team. They just never managed up to her. And we got to spend time, though, really listening and asking questions and figuring out what the pain points were. And some of the pain points was she was super nervous how our garbage was going to get picked up from our building. And because the garbage truck uses the loading zone we were going to turn into a zero emission delivery zone, and we don't have zero emission garbage trucks. Very few people have that nowadays. And as we got to talk through that, she was like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to go talk to our parking enforcement manager, and we're going to give them an exemption. Simple, problem solved. But I think it's, you know, those like interpersonal conversations, like that listening, those kinds of things that is really important. It's not just a policy on a piece of paper, but like how that gets implemented and how that gets implemented with humans who have their own pressing demands, I think are really important kind of change management considerations.
I've absolutely gotten that fiery email or phone call, and they always wait until you're away at a conference or you're out on vacation. But yes, I would say that similarly. So here's the thing you have to remember about all of these things. We can turn on the data, but that doesn't mean I've turned it on today and now 3 days later I'm ready to start implementing policy. That's not actually how any of it works. When we turn on the data, we spend actually a lot of time before we have enough data to where we can actually analyze and create a real policy decision related to that. But we do want to make decisions based upon the data we see, but it is not something that turns on the very next day. So as we've begun to look at this internally, in our internal working with others, we are now getting to the space, and this is after maybe 5 years of scooter data, of getting to the space where we're able to begin working with other departments, such as our active transportation group that works a little bit on the Vision Zero pieces. We're working with, as they look at where to put intersections, or even as we begin to think at where to put bike lanes. We now have enough data about bike lanes, or at least how the traffic usage is for scooter users and bike users in our city to determine, this will be a good spot to have that done. So it wasn't something that we could do 30 days later. And there is an argument that maybe it shouldn't have taken 5 years either. But we are at that space now. So part of that internal understanding and working is also getting leadership to understand the value of it. Because there is a big question, and I think it's a fair question when people say, you're going to collect data, what are you going to do with it? And I think most legal minds would also agree, it's not what you do, it's what you didn't do. So collecting it for collecting its sake is not great either. So we do want to get to a space where we learn how to use that data. And so as we got all this data in, one of the things we were able to do is eventually get a data analyst, something that I never had in my department before. When I first started doing a lot of this work, I had like admin clerks and things like that. And now I have people who have GIS specialties, and Helena, who's my data analyst, is actually a data scientist. So now, because I can look at the data, but I'm asking all the wrong questions. But she's looking at the data and, no, here's the question that you should really be asking, and here's, But that's also the internal part for working with your cities and working with your leadership. These are the things you need to help you actually process that data effectively. And because once that person reviews the data along with the GIS people, then they draw the maps and then they show me, then it's my job to be able to talk to the council members, talk to the mayor's office, talk to my bosses, write the budget and say, hey, here are the things we think we can accomplish and here's how we think we're going to get there. And so in terms of the internal working, the other part is that too. Hey, Jarvis, we're doing a safe routes to school. What do you see in this area? And internally, we share that data. Here's what we're seeing in that area. Here are what the trips are looking like in that area. And then they use that data however they want to use it. I mean, it's empirical data. Data's just data. We're not there to editorialize the data for them. We just show it, and then they got it. Here's what we think we can do with that data. And that's really the beauty of being able to do it internally.
Yeah.
Can I ask the audience another question?
Yeah, go for it.
So what's the most feared word in civic innovation? Throw it out there. What? Yeah, say it. What's the most feared word in civic innovation? Okay, regulation's good. It's not what I was thinking, but another one. Cost, bureaucracy, procurement.
That's
Oh my
what I was gonna
gosh.
say. That was
Came
mine.
from right over here. Bing, ding, 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 ding. Yes. So procurement, and just briefly, on that change management aspect, one of the lessons and the takeaways and the when I'll do it again around the smart grants and the opportunity for these 10 cities to really push the envelope on innovation, there were struggles with procurement. Not surprising, right? And I don't mean to pick on any procurement officers or contract folks. They're doing really important work and they're doing hard jobs. But those jobs and that hard work was not set up to facilitate kind of the speed and flexibility that comes with trying new things. And in retrospect, at the outset, or perhaps even before the grant applications went in, the OMF as an organization could have facilitated a conversation across cities and within their procurement teams and talked about what may be coming down the pike and help set that up for success at the outset, which could have led to some smoother processes, down the line. That was just one thing that came to mind when you talked about kind of some of that internal change management opportunities.
Well, and I think there's an opportunity for us to also coach our peers better and think creatively about it. Like one thing, and I don't even know if I've shared it with other cities in the collaborative, but one thing we did after we got award notification, but still before we had a contract with the feds, we actually polled our bureau contracting, our central contracting, our city attorney, and a bunch of other people together for a meeting where I said, we're winning this grant. This grant is on a super fast timeline. How long does it take to get a technology contract through our city? And they're like, well, on average 2 to 3 years. I was like, my project is supposed to be fully delivered in 18 months, and we have to figure it out. So here's my contracts. Here's what who I think I'm going to work with. Help me solve this problem. And it actually unlocked the procurement folks who frankly have one of the probably harder jobs, less satisfying jobs. Everyone's constantly mad at them. They're constantly behind. But it unlocked them to be problem solvers for a project with a larger purpose. And, we've invited them to then participate in come to launch day. So you can see the impact of your work because you played a critical role in this project that, yes, my team and I are delivering on every day, but we could have done nothing without you. And you helped us figure this out.
Make procurement heroes. I think that's an amazing takeaway from this. And I will also say, if you have ever been audited, you will be very grateful that your procurement officers follow all the rules and know all of the policies and procedures and can find the right way to balance the promise and potential benefit of what you're doing for your agency with the actual level of risk that you're actually incurring and the actual dollar size of what you're trying to do and the speed and all of those things. There are ways to match your contracting vehicles with what you're actually undertaking instead of trying to do the same level of diligence that we would do for, a $200 million infrastructure project for your $1.6 million 18-month curb pilot, right? Yeah. Well, I know that we're getting close to time. We want to start asking questions from the audience, so start thinking if you have questions for these amazing panelists. But I want to touch on something else that we already spoke about a little bit when you talked about revenue, Andrew, which is, unfortunately, not every city can have a SMART grant. And even the SMART grants will eventually come to a close someday. But these projects, we hope, will live on. You're doing amazing work, you're starting amazing work, but it's only the beginning, and these are things that you hope will grow in your own cities and across our country and maybe across the world. So what is it that you think cities need to sustain these kinds of projects? What are you looking at in your own cities to help get you into, the next phase and the next phase and the next phase, and maybe even beyond your own tenures? Your own leadership will change, your departments will turn over. How do you institutionalize and keep these things afloat?
We've been thinking a lot about the business model for this work from very early on. And I think that's because, innovation seed funds do go away. I mean, even in the private sector, that the exact same thing happens, right? Get that angel investment, you might be able to grow it, and at some point you have to figure out how the business model works. We have to do those exact same things in the public sector side. I think one thing that we've uncovered I say somewhat questioningly, is how poorly the curb is managed in a day-to-day way. Through some observational data one of our universities did, we discovered that some of the loading zones in our central business district are used improperly 3/4 of the time. 3 out of 4 times that Amazon, UPS, FedEx, the flower delivery person show up to try and make a delivery, the wrong person is there who shouldn't be there. And it's been really interesting conversation for us with industry because they're actually excited about our project because they see us, my words, not theirs, of getting the deadbeats out of the loading zones so they can use them and move on with their jobs. And I think we've started to realize that there might be a permitting process to put in place to better manage those loading zones, and that permitting could become then a space for better enforcement, which is what's needed, but it could also become a revenue stream to support the work. And so now we're starting to kind of work on what that could look like, what the timelines would be, who the stakeholders would be, all of those kinds of things. And so, I think asking yourself the business model question, which maybe you're not going to have it figured out at the onset. And just like entrepreneurs in the private sector, you've got to do those different business model permutations of what if I try this and what if I try that in order to figure out like what could stick and how could it move forward. And, are you solving real pain points? And will people invest? And I think we're getting there, and I'm really excited about the opportunity that lies on the horizon.
Yeah, I would, completely agree with that in the sense that as we try to think about how to do this in a long term, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to set legacy projects, right? And even as we are doing the curb, right now our pilot is primarily for downtown, but the idea is for it to be scalable, throughout our 500 square miles and not just in that area. And so, what we try to do is, and I know Jacob and I are in this space where we have to write rules and regulations. And so we try to sit down and think about what's going to be the future of regulation. What will this look like when I leave here? And I often think about it in terms of metaphor, right? So I think of it like you're conducting a symphony. I don't play the instruments, but I've done enough rehearsals with everyone so that everyone knows where we're going. We know we're going to crescendo here. We know we're going to, drop here. And, we're going to, repeat this stanza. We're going to do all of these things. But I should also, if I've done my symphony right, if I've done my practice and my rehearsals correctly, I should also be able to leave the stage. And it should be able to, they are good enough to play on their own. And that if a new conductor comes in and says, let's play that piece, you can still play the same piece. Maybe that new conductor wants a crescendo in a different place, but you can still play the piece without a whole lot of changes. And that's how I think about the work that we do. So I'm trying to set it up in a way that, like, when I do leave at some point, I'm an old man, someone's gonna be able to step in and say, the pieces are already there. I wanna do some different things, but the framework exists, the curve has been coded, I wanna price it this way. And the last thing I do wanna say is, Andrew had asked, like, what's the dirty word? And whoever said regulation, that's the dirty word that I always hear. Thank you, because that's the one. It's like a 4-letter word, and they come and they shout it in my face. But it's important to know that when we're doing this work, there's some level of accountability we have to have with the data, and that is the point. But the other point is helping your businesses grow. And in the regulatory space, where Jacob and I are, we understand profitability. We understand, that right now this is like seed funding, and at some point you have to figure out what your business model is going to be. And we're here to help you get there. If you're operating within the accountability parameters, we want to see you grow as big and as much as you possibly can. So I think that's where we are in our data usage.
In a well-conducted orchestra, every instrument has an opportunity to solo and be heard and have a career as a long-term musician.
This is
in
correct.
a cacophonous battle of noise, nobody pays for tickets, right? Andrew, anything you're hearing from other crew members around sustainability or thinking long-term?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as Jacob and Jarvis were talking, and I recalled being an 8-year-old and really being excited every time I drove with my parents downtown to grab the quarter out of the center console to run over and get to drop the quarter in the meter and turn the dial for the half an hour that we were buying to pay for that space. Today you can pay for parking via a mobile app, or you tap your credit card on the kiosk that's there. Where that's going is still it's exciting to think of where it's going in the future, but change has happened. The innovation has happened, and it is continuing to happen, with sustainable programs being the goal. Proof of concept is what we have to focus on now, so that others can follow in follow the lead of the collaborative and see that just like meters change from coin-based, turn the knob to pay by phone options or whatever it may be, the way that we manage the curb can also change and evolve and can become part of the city's operations and maintenance cycles. It can be built into the programs of the way they do business. But they're not going to get there unless they can see the opportunity through the proofs of concept, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things about what the SMART grant was seeding, is the ability to see that future opportunity by doing things differently and then building these into O&M programs going forward.
Amazing. A lot of really great thoughts here. I do want to open the floor up to all of you. If you have questions, we have somebody with a mic who can bring you one, because otherwise it'll be really hard to hear you. We've got a hand down here in the front. Oh, great, thank you. And when you ask your question, please just introduce yourself and say where you're from.
Hi, my name is Paul McLaren. I'm from the city of Camarillo in Ventura County. So we are, we're a small city, 70,000 people, which is 76% of the cities in America, and where 60% of our population resides. So my question is really kind of some of the things you've brought up is this scalable to smaller cities? Because we are getting ready to kick off our climate action and resiliency plan. We are discovering that we have problems in our old town with parking and other issues where the curb could be used much better. But honestly, I had to convince my bosses to allow me to come here because I recognize that there is some great things coming here that can be done, whereas it's not even in their horizon. They have no concept whatsoever. So the question really is it going to ever be scalable and pushed down to where smaller cities can adopt these sort of things? Is it financially feasible for smaller cities to adopt these sort of things? And then how do you then deliver that message? And my first inclination is, how can I tell my council that this is going to be an economic boon somehow to our city? Because I really believe that's really the only way I'm going to ever get it off the table or onto the table even for consideration.
Jacob, you want to start? And then I think Andrew really wants to jump in.
Do you want to start?
No, go ahead, please.
I mean, I completely can relate in a different way. I don't live in the city of Portland. I live just outside of Portland in the city of Milwaukee, Oregon. We're 21,000 people. I'm chair of our planning commission as a side hobby of mine, and we have 160 FTE for our city, over a third of which is public safety related. So I've had these exact same conversations with folks, and I think an interesting thing is the opportunity to improve efficiency, to better support your local businesses. There's a cost associated with that, but it's also a cost that I think can kind of can improve what's happening in your city streets. And I think that is part of how you can maybe sell that story. I also think some of the vendors that we've worked with, also tier pricing based off of the size of your city and the level of technical effort. City of Los Angeles is doing a lot of their data work in-house, with a data scientist. We don't have a data scientist. City of Portland, we're just cracked the top 25 of largest cities in the United States. In many ways, we're, kind of the every mid-sized U.S. city, although we've got been doing a lot around sustainable transportation for a long time. And so I think some of what there needs to be is that opportunity to kind of think about how you can partner with the private sector who might be able to have the tools, who might have some of the data that's ready to go. You would, of course, have to figure out where some of the resource comes for that, but the level of resource is going to be significantly less than hiring a new staff person or 2 staff people or things like that.
Can I jump in really quick?
Please.
So just one real quick thing from the city side, and I do recognize that we're a large city, but on the practical side, I think as you begin to figure out, because this is the dirty word for regulation, you're going to have a permit program potentially over it, and you build it into your cost recovery. And so as you begin putting together your budget for what is this going to take, and obviously when you have a third-party vendor, you want to do negotiations and all of that properly. But when you put together your budget and you find out how much it's going to take, let's say it's $1 million to run this whole program in your city. Then you build that into your permit structure and you build that into your permit fees. Because again, you will be getting data that will be helpful for you planning in a lot of other different areas. And so when you're selling it to your council member and to your budget teams, you're not gonna realize value day one and maybe not even year one, but you will realize value by year 2 or 3 if you have a permit program for sure. And so that's how I would look at it on a practical standpoint.
Yeah, Paul, short answer is yes. Absolutely, scale down, scale up. It's the beauty of the work around curb digitization. It can be very contextualized to what you need out of managing that public space in a more dynamic way.
I think we may have time for one more. If we can pass the mic up over here, and then we will wrap. Thank you.
Victoria Dower, independent consultant. You guys, something that was surprising during the course of these projects.
One of my favorite early surprises in our project after we publicly announced we were going to be using advanced digital technology to pilot the nation's first zero-emission delivery zone was getting on calls with industry to hear their questions, to hear their concerns, of which we heard a lot of some of those things. But in particular, I remember the surprise of the conversation with DHL, the yellow trucks deliveries, who really is a leader kind of in this space, especially in Europe. And when we were on the call with them and explained to them what our project was, that we were reprioritizing curb for zero-emission vehicles, their national policy director was on there with their national sustainability director and their local operations folks. And the policy and sustainability turned on the Zoom call to the other person and said, "Do we have any electric trucks in Portland?" He said, "Nope." And they said, "We should get some." And he said, "Okay." And then like the next day they ordered 4 Ford E-Transits and started through the permitting process to get EV chargers installed at their distribution center so that they could continue to make deliveries in our city. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember. There are going to be organizations who aren't going to hear regulation as the 4-letter word because they understand that regulation is the world that they exist in and that the world is changing and that they can actually use it as an advantage because now they're able to market to the people that are paying them to deliver goods that we're doing electric truck delivery in parts of Portland, Oregon. And so I think that's a kind of important thing for us to kind of remember and was definitely one of the surprises on our project.
That was a good surprise. Jarvis, your surprise?
I don't know that I have one as good as that. I think for me, the surprise is really more looking at the data. Like, I recently learned we have like over 3,000 miles of curb space in LA, and I'm just like, what? I had no idea. And I think the other thing, which wasn't so much a surprise, but maybe something that isn't all that obvious, is as you get companies on these platforms, if you get one of the companies that like has a great deal of market share on these platforms, like for example, on MDS, when I got our largest taxi company on, many of the other ones immediately fell in line, and a lot of it was it's a little bit of a competitive fear that they all have, where if one person's doing it, then everyone starts to do it. So a lot of it is really getting that first domino to go, and then the rest of it gets a lot easier. But it's always the first thing that's the hardest.
Yeah. Last word, Andrew?
Sure. I'd say that I've been surprised at the potential that is being unlocked by digitizing the curb. I don't know if any of us, when we went into this, fully realized how much can be done once you take an asset that is essentially signs and concrete and create a digital version that can then be layered upon and used and kind of unlock that potential.
Well, there's so much more potential for the conversation and for the curb. We are out of time. I want to thank you all so much for your attention. Let's give all of our speakers a round of applause.